Today, we're starting a journey that's both intellectually really fascinating, but also deeply personal. It reaches way back to our origins and, frankly, shapes how we see ourselves right now. Our mission, if you like, for this is to revisit Charles Darwin's insights. Groundbreaking, yes, but often controversial, especially when it comes to human evolution. We want to put a critical lens on his specific ideas about human sex differences. And then, maybe even more importantly, look at the legacy of his whole scientific approach. Think of it like this. We're getting ready for this amazing dinner party. Darwin himself is the guest of honor, and we're going to share, 150 years of incredible science that's built on and sometimes totally rewired his work. Our main source for this intellectual feast comes from this brilliant collection called Darwin Revisited. And we're focusing particularly on contributions from Dr. Holly Dunsworth, she's a top anthropologist, and Ann Gibbons, a really well-known journalist from Science magazine. Their work is just fantastic at updating Darwin's ideas with, well, a century and a half of new discoveries. This isn't just history, you see. It's about how science actually works, how it evolves, corrects itself, and gives us a much more nuanced, accurate, and I think empowering view of biology and society. So let's dive in. We should probably start with one of the most controversial but absolutely vital areas, Darwin's legacy on sex differences. Now, if you read The Descent of Man, Darwin spent a lot of time, a really significant chunk of the book on this topic. He framed it pretty cleverly for his day within his big theory of sexual selection. And this is where, for us today, it gets really interesting and maybe a bit uncomfortable through our modern lens.
It really does. Because at the core of Darwin's claims was this powerful idea that males and females often differ quite profoundly because sexual selection acts more strongly on one sex. He believed, and this was absolutely central, that this force usually hit males harder. This, he thought, led to those, elaborate traits we see everywhere in nature.
Like antlers on a stag or a peacock's tail?
Exactly, those huge antlers, the amazing plumage on birds. Darwin saw these as direct results of intense male-male competition, fighting for mates, basically, and also females choosing the most impressive males. It was, in his view, a fundamental driver of why the sexes look and act differently.
Okay, so that's the general theory, but how did he apply that specifically to humans? That's where it gets problematic, you said.
Right. When he turned that lens on humans, his arguments got very specific and, pretty problematic from our perspective now. He argued that men evolved greater physical strength, higher intellect, more courage, specifically because of this male-male competition and because women chose certain traits in partners.
Okay.
Well, conversely, he characterized women in ways that sound pretty stark today. He described them as, quote, less eager in their sexual nature, less inventive, more emotionally driven.
Wow. That sounds very Victorian.
It was incredibly reflective of Victorian gender norms, almost uncannily so. His scientific claims, perhaps unintentionally, ended up providing a kind of pseudoscientific justification for the social hierarchies that already existed, where men held the dominant positions in society and public life, in intellectual pursuits.
And the impact of those ideas, did they stick around?
Oh, absolutely. You really can't overstate it. These assertions, especially about sex differences, really resonated. For over a century, they fueled narratives that justified gender hierarchies. They influenced how society saw male and female roles, their capabilities, everything from who got educated to what jobs were considered suitable.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of science, even from brilliant minds like Darwin, was shaped by the biases of the time?
That is such a crucial question. And it's exactly where modern biology comes in, challenging and often completely overturning those assumptions. Dr. Holly Dunsworth's work, which is so central here, looks at the biology of sex differences with a modern eye. She's armed with 150 years of new data, new tech, and a perspective free from those Victorian biases.
So what does modern biology actually say? Does it dismiss sex differences entirely?
Not at all. Of course, we absolutely acknowledge the fundamental biological differences.
Mm-hmm.
Males typically XY chromosomes, females XX. That difference leads to different sex-determining genes, like SRY in males, that kind of master switch for male development, and different dominant hormones, like testosterone versus estrogen. These absolutely influence development in many ways. But, and this is the really crucial transformative insight, when scientists look at how our brains actually work, at gene expression in the brain,
Yeah, what do they find?
they find far more overlap than difference between the sexes. We share the same fundamental neural architecture.
So the idea of a distinct male brain and female brain is not really accurate.
It basically shatters that old idea. The aha moment for you listening is that your brain, whatever your sex, is built on the same basic blueprint for thought, emotion, creativity. There's this huge shared potential.
That's fascinating. So what about the differences we do observe, like average height or strength?
Right, that leads us to the critical difference between average differences and individual variation. And this concept of overlap is key. Yes, it's true. On average, men tend to be taller, have greater upper body strength. Women, on average, tend to have greater fat reserves, important for reproduction, and often better endurance. These are statistical averages.
Okay, averages. But what's the catch?
The catch is the individual variation within each sex is absolutely massive. Think of it like two broad, overlapping bell curves, not two separate boxes. Many women are stronger than the average man, many men have better endurance than the average woman, and so on. The distributions overlap so much that an individual's capabilities, your capabilities, are far more important than any broad average based on sex. Averages exist, but they don't define individuals.
That makes a lot of sense. Does the fossil record tell us anything about how long these differences have existed? Was it always like this?
That's another really interesting piece. The fossil record actually challenges the idea of fixed, unchanging differences. If you look at early hominins, like Australopithecus afarensis, that's Lucy's species, they only show about a 15% difference in average body size between sexes.
Only 15%. How does that compare to other apes?
It's actually less dimorphism than you see in gorillas or orangutans today, where males are much, much bigger. This suggests that really pronounced differences aren't some ancient defining human trait from the very beginning.
So when did bigger differences appear?
We see larger dimorphism later, with species like Homo erectus. They were taller, more robust, but this shift might reflect changes in their social structure, maybe more male competition then, or different ecological pressures they faced. It wasn't necessarily an innate male superiority thing carried over from the start. It points to adaptation.
So it's more dynamic, less fixed.
Exactly. Dr. Dunsworth really emphasizes this point. Biological sex differences aren't static. They're profoundly context-dependent. They're shaped not just by genes and hormones, but by the environment, by social roles, even by technology. Our biology interacts dynamically with our world. It's not a rigid script.
That's a huge reframing.
Yeah.
Biology is a flexible toolkit, not a fixed destiny. Okay, so building on that, let's talk about gender roles themselves. If biology isn't rigid, were roles rigid in the past? Archaeology and ethnographic studies seem to paint a picture of flexibility, right? Not the strict categories we sometimes imagine.
Precisely. When anthropologists study recent hunter-gatherer societies, or archaeologists interpret past ones, they find a much more fluid picture than, say, the Victorians assumed. It wasn't always men hunt big game, women gather plants. While those were common patterns, the boundaries were often quite permeable.
Women gathered plants, nuts, maybe small game. Men hunted larger animals.
Often, yes. But women also hunted in some societies, and men gathered. And here's a cool detail. Experimental data shows that running endurance and heat tolerance traits, where women often have an edge on average, were vital for gathering, carrying heavy loads, long distances, and just general group movement.
Ah, so female biology was directly linked to crucial survival strategies for the whole group, not just babies.
Absolutely. It highlights how collaborative early human life likely was.
And speaking of babies, how did childbearing fit in? Didn't that limit women's activities?
Well, it certainly shapes activity patterns, that's undeniable, but it wasn't necessarily limiting in the way we might think, largely because of a key social innovation: cooperative breeding, or alloparenting.
Alloparenting. What's that?
It means childcare wasn't solely the mother's job. Fathers, siblings, grandmothers, other group members, they all chipped in significantly with feeding, protecting, carrying the young.
So it takes a village, literally.
Literally. This collective effort freed mothers from exclusive childcare much sooner. And the implications were huge. It fostered stronger social bonds, made the group more cohesive, and it allowed women to engage in a much wider variety of tasks, making tools, processing resources, maybe even joining hunts sometimes. They were active, essential contributors in many ways.
What about things like tool making? Wasn't that always seen as a male activity?
Another stereotype busted by evidence. Modern experiments where people try to replicate ancient flint knapping show both sexes can master complex tool production equally well with practice. It's about skill, not sex.
And archaeology. Burial sites.
Exactly. We find burials across the globe where grave goods clearly indicate women held significant ritual, spiritual, or even leadership roles. Priestesses, maybe even chieftains. This totally contradicts the old assumption of a universally male-dominated prehistory.
So putting it all together,
Dr. Dunsworth's argument really becomes clear. Gendered behaviors and roles emerge from specific social and ecological situations. They aren't dictated by some fixed mental or moral endowment tied to sex. It highlights our incredible adaptability as a species. That flexibility was key to our survival.
That adaptability is such a key theme. Our biology is more flexible than Darwin could have guessed, given his time, which I suppose brings us back to one of his most problematic claims about that adaptability, or lack thereof, his assertion of women's intellectual inferiority. That seems like a major point where modern science has had to make a correction.
A major correction, yes. Thankfully, modern science has completely dismantled that idea head-on with data.
So what does the data show about cognitive abilities?
Well, when you look at overall intelligence, the scientific consensus, based on loads of meta-analyses combining many studies, finds negligible, really practically zero average sex differences in overall intelligence. It's a consistent finding.
So no smarter sex overall.
Definitely not. What you see is that performance differences depend much more on the specific task, on individual motivation, on learning history, than on sex. It just reinforces that massive individual variability we talked about. The idea of one sex being inherently intellectually inferior is just a myth.
What about specific areas like creativity or communication? Are there tendencies there?
There are some observed tendencies on average. Women often show slight average advantages in things like verbal fluency. Men may show slight average advantages in certain spatial tasks, like mentally rotating objects.
But how significant are those? And are they fixed?
That's the crucial counterpoint. Training and experience can significantly narrow and often completely erase those gaps. This strongly suggests many differences are learned or culturally encouraged, not hardwired. It really points to the power of environment and opportunity.
Okay, so if cognitive abilities are largely similar, what about things like leadership or risk-taking? Darwin probably had views on those too.
He did, and they were often linked to biology. But modern understanding sees these behaviors as heavily influenced by social norms and cultural expectations, not fixed biological traits. We have vivid examples from different cultures where women traditionally lead hunts, manage trade expeditions, or hold significant political or spiritual power.
Right, contradicting any idea that biology universally dictates those roles.
Exactly. It shows how incredibly flexible human behavior is. We adapt to our context.
So the takeaway here is plasticity.
Precisely. Sex differences in behavior largely reflect plasticity, our amazing human capacity to adapt roles and behaviors to different environments and cultures. It's not a weakness. It's arguably one of our species' greatest strengths. It's what allowed us to thrive everywhere.
Plasticity, adaptability, that's a much more dynamic picture than Darwin painted. This reevaluation, moving from fixed hierarchies to adaptive strategies, it feels like it leads us to think about Darwin's whole legacy and how science itself changes. So what does this all mean for Darwin's overall understanding? How do we pull these threads together?
Well, when you synthesize all this modern evidence, it becomes clear that our current understanding of evolution actually provides a really robust basis for gender equality. The recognition that both sexes evolved cooperative strategies for group survival fundamentally refutes any idea of one sex being inherently superior. It dismantles that old hierarchical view.
So the differences we do see are better understood
as adaptive strategies, shaped by specific ecological pressures, the demands of childcare, group dynamics. They aren't rigid roles dictated from on high. They're flexible responses.
which emphasizes the importance of individual variation again.
Exactly. That variation and our social flexibility allowed for this incredible diversity of roles for men and women across cultures and history. And Dr. Dunsworth's analysis really reframes sex differences beautifully, not just as tools for competition, but as evolutionary innovations for cooperative living. That's a powerful shift in thinking.
From competition to cooperation, that's huge. And this whole process, this rethinking, it leads us perfectly into that thought experiment you mentioned earlier, the dinner party.
Right, Ann Gibbons' idea in Science magazine. What if we could actually sit down with Charles Darwin?
Imagine it. We invite him over, maybe to Down House, his home, walk the thinking path with him.
Yeah, where he paced and pondered.
Then sit him down for a meal. But instead of, I don't know, roast beef, we serve him a feast of 150 years of scientific discovery since the descent of man in 1871.
An intellectual banquet.
Exactly. So what's on the menu? Appetizers. The incredible array of fossil hominins, Lucy, Homo naleda, fossils he could only have dreamed of.
Things that prove upright walking came way before big brains, for instance. That would amaze him.
Main course. The genomic revolution. Our DNA map showing deep connections to Neanderthals, Denisovans. A much messier, more interesting family tree than a simple ladder.
And the side dishes. Evidence for deep social cooperation, sophisticated tool use stretching back millions of years, symbolic thought art, ritual.
And for dessert, sweet, sweet vindication, his African origins hypothesis proven right decades later.
Gibbon suggests they would bring tears of joy to his eyes. And I think she's right.
But she also warns some courses would be harder to swallow.
Definitely. Especially the evidence that dismantles his Victorian views on race and gender. Those would be the uncomfortable truths at the dinner table.
Okay, let's serve those uncomfortable courses later. First, let's savor the victories. Where did Darwin get it spectacularly right? What would make him beam with satisfaction?
Well, number one has to be the African origins hypothesis. It was truly remarkable foresight. Based mostly on where apes lived, he predicted humans originated in Africa, long before the fossils proved it.
And the fossils came pouring out later.
Overwhelmingly. From Australopithecus onwards, the record confirms Africa as the cradle. That validation of his intuition would be immense for him.
What else?
Common descent with apes. He argued for our close kinship. Now, genomics shows we share 96 to 99% of our DNA with chimps and bonobos. It's irrefutable.
We really are just a type of African ape.
Exactly. An ape that walks upright, talks a lot, and thinks about itself. It beautifully integrates us into nature, which he always argued for.
And his idea of gradual change. Evolution happening slowly over time.
Beautifully borne out by the fossils. We see incremental changes. Bipedalism first, then tools get better, then brains get significantly bigger much later. No sudden leaps, just gradual adaptation. Exactly as he suspected.
Did he anticipate the importance of cooperation? We often hear survival of the fittest and think only of competition.
He actually wrote quite a bit about sympathy, reciprocity, even group selection, how helping your group could be evolutionarily advantageous. And modern primatology and psychology strongly support these ideas. We see cooperation in apes, and psychological studies show deep roots for our own social instincts, fairness, altruism. It's not just tooth and claw.
And sexual selection itself, the core idea behind the sex differences discussion.
The core theory remains incredibly powerful. From explaining peacock tails to the complexities of human attraction and mate choice, sexual selection is still a vital tool for understanding evolution across the board.
So lots of reasons for Darwin to be pleased, seeing how his ideas held up and were confirmed.
Absolutely. As Gibbon says, likely tears of joy. It shows the power of his thinking.
Okay, but now for those harder courses. Where did Darwin, limited by his time and its biases, get things wrong? Where would the modern evidence make him uncomfortable?
This is where we have to confront the influence of his era. First, and maybe most profoundly, race and hierarchy.
His views reflected common Victorian beliefs in racial hierarchies, didn't they?
They did. But modern genetics delivers a definitive verdict.
Yeah.
Human races are social constructs. They have no biological basis.
No distinct biological groups.
None. Genetic diversity is actually greatest within African populations. All humans share very recent common ancestry out of Africa. This completely demolishes any biological concept of racial superiority or a ladder of races. It's a myth, a harmful one.
That would be a huge adjustment for him. What else?
We have to come back to female intellectual inferiority. As we discussed, archaeological evidence shows women making tools, art, holding leadership roles. Cognitive science shows negligible difference in overall intelligence. The evidence flatly contradicts his view.
Right, the evidence just isn't there for his claims.
And then there's his idea of linear progress, that societies move from savage to civilized, with Victorian Europe implicitly at the top.
That Eurocentric view.
Exactly. Modern anthropology and archaeology show complex societies arose independently all over the world. Think of Great Zimbabwe, Cahokia in North America, Angkor Wat. Driven by local factors, not some innate racial ladder. There was no single path to civilization, and Europe wasn't the inevitable endpoint.
That challenges a whole worldview.
It does. And one more, a purely scientific one. His mechanism for inheritance.
Pangenesis.
Yes, his theory of gemmules from all body parts blending in the offspring. It was completely wrong.
We needed DNA for that.
Exactly. DNA, discovered decades later, provided the real mechanism. He would have had to accept that his theory of how traits were passed on was incorrect.
So how does Gibbons imagine he'd react to all this correction?
She suggests he'd be deeply troubled, especially by how his words were misused to justify racism and sexism. But, crucially, she believes he was intellectually honest enough to revise his views when faced with overwhelming evidence.
That willingness to change his mind based on data, That's the key scientific virtue, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And that brings us perfectly to the overarching message of this whole reevaluation, doesn't it? The core lesson from Darwin Revisited.
Please.
That science is inherently self-correcting. Darwin's errors don't diminish his incredible contributions. They actually demonstrate how science works. Knowledge advances through testing, debate, revision, constantly getting closer to reality.
So mistakes are part of the process.
A vital part. It relies on key principles. First, hypotheses are made to be tested, challenged, maybe thrown out. They aren't sacred texts.
Evidence over authority.
Precisely. Evidence is the ultimate judge, not the fame of the scientist. That's why science moves forward even when giants stumble.
And it's a collective effort.
Absolutely. Understanding blossoms through collective inquiry, pooling knowledge, challenging each other's biases. No single mind gets it all right.
Which is why diverse perspectives are so important.
Crucial. Different backgrounds bring different questions, different insights. It makes the science stronger, more robust. The book itself, with its 12 scholars, is a perfect example of that collaborative power.
So as we wrap up our hypothetical dinner with Darwin, what's the lasting takeaway about his legacy? It's clearly huge, but also evolving.
It's immense and transformative. He gave us the fundamental framework evolution by natural selection to understand life's diversity. That's monumental.
And his method.
He showed us the power of careful observation, collecting data meticulously, forming bold hypotheses, a blueprint for doing science.
He also placed humans firmly within nature, right? Not
A
some
radical shift, integrating us into the tree of life, not placing us on a pedestal above it.
And maybe most importantly,
He showed that the biggest questions, where did we come from, are ultimately answerable through evidence and reason. He set the stage for centuries of scientific inquiry.
he called human evolution the most interesting problem for the naturalists. Still true.
Absolutely. After 150 years of discovery, it remains endlessly fascinating, constantly surprising, and far more wondrous than even he could have imagined.
So, bringing this whole deep dive together, reflecting on Darwin Revisited, what are the big final thoughts for you, for the listener?
Well, we've seen the evidence for evolution is in our own bodies, those embryonic traces, vestigial bits. Our amazing brains are built from animal parts, refined over eons.
And our social nature, morality, cooperation, deep evolutionary roots.
Exactly. We've seen his African origins idea confirmed, while the picture of our family tree became much richer, more complex. And crucially, those harmful Victorian prejudices about race and sex differences dismantled by evidence.
So the core message is,
Science isn't about faith in giants like Darwin. It's about following the evidence, relentlessly, correcting course, always seeking better understanding. That's its power.
and Darwin's genius wasn't perfection.
No. It was boundless curiosity, asking the big questions, following the data even when it was uncomfortable. That spirit is what drives science today.
And this story, human evolution, it isn't finished, is it?
Not even close. It's dynamic, ongoing. New fossils, new DNA techniques, new insights into our minds emerge all the time. Each discovery adds another sentence to this incredible story of us.
And for you listening, think about it. You carry 4 billion years of evolution in every cell.
You're the current chapter. It makes you both ordinary part of this immense sweep of life and utterly extraordinary the universe becoming aware of itself through you.
Darwin would be amazed at how far we've come.
Utterly amazed. But maybe even more excited about what's still out there to discover.
So the final word.
Keep questioning, keep wondering, keep celebrating this magnificent, evolving, unlikely journey that made us human.
Mad show, let's go, open up your mind and grow. Facts and stories, things you never know. Every episode, we light the glow. Step into the world of Mad Show. Turn it up, let the river flow. Feel the beat, take control. Don't be shy, just let it go. This is where the magic grows. Tune in now, it's the Mad Show. Lights up bright and minds will glow. Every day we learn and grow. Come along and join the flow. New ideas begin to shine. Breaking limits, crossing lines. Every moment feels divine. In the world of Mad Show time. Turn it up, let the real It's the Mass Show. Lights so bright and minds will glow. Every day we learn and grow. Come along and join the flow.